Welcome back, friends, to this special July mini-series of the EventsDemystified podcast. This is our 6-year anniversary, and we decided to do things a little differently. If you've been walking with me through these chapters, well, thank you. We began our mini-series July 4th under an oak tree in Romania. We arrived in California chasing light while also learning how to carry cables and uncertainty at the same time. But today the lights dim. This chapter is different. It's not about where I came from or what I built. It's about what broke. Because no story worth telling skips the part where it all falls apart. So before we get started, this mini-series is dedicated to you listening right now, wherever you are in your own becoming. To my listeners, whether you've been with me since episode 1 or just press play for the very first time this month. Also to every woman and man out there who's been told they're too much, they're too loud, they're too strong, they're too soft, too this, too that. Whatever it was, you fill in the blank, the story is also for you. Chapter 11 is titled When the Feed Goes Dark. It's about an emotional connection that struck just like lightning and disappeared just as fast. It's about addiction, not to a person, but to the version of ourselves we think we are when we're with them for too long. And the silence that follows when that illusion shatters. And with that, let's begin.
Welcome to the EventsDemystified podcast, where we demystify the world of in-person, virtual, and hybrid events, AV production, and AI technology by sharing practical tips, tricks, and strategies to help your event succeed. This podcast is brought to you by Treefan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency that caters to event professionals, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. We specialize in AV and AI education, integration, automation, and implementation, all based on our Fit for Events framework, which focuses on futuristic AV production, innovative AI technology, thriving audiences, and empowering behind-the-scenes teams. And I'm your host, Anca Platon Treefan, with over 2 decades of hands-on experience in event production, event management, and now AI technologies and cybersecurity.
In our industry, dead air is technical terminology for that moment of unintended silence, the absence of broadcast signal that makes producers panic and audiences grow uncomfortable. It represents failure, a lapse in the carefully orchestrated flow that keeps shows running and crowds engaged. We're trained to avoid it at all costs. Yet, in March of 2020, dead air became our collective reality. The constant hum of event production, the background noise of my life for over 15 years, fell silent with a finality that none of us had ever experienced before. One day, we were loading in for upcoming shows, checking equipment, confirming schedules, and the next, we were watching contracts disappear from calendars and venues shut their doors, and colleagues after colleagues post the same desperate question on LinkedIn and social media. What now? The silence was deafening. I remember standing in my home office right here, that second week of March, staring at my empty calendar. A visual representation of income evaporated, purpose suspended, identity suddenly in question. Shows that had been meticulously planned for months vanished overnight. The physical machinery of our industry, the speakers, the lights, the microphones, the mixing boards, the video equipment, everything and anything sitting dormant in warehouses across the country. For someone whose life had been measured in loadings and loadouts, in the rhythm of show after show, the sudden stillness felt like tree falling through space. The constant motion that had defined me sometimes exhausted me, often fulfilled me, was now gone. No flights to catch, no advanced teams to coordinate, no technical challenges to solve, just silence, stretching out indefinitely. What surprised me most wasn't the financial panic, though that certainly came. It was how naked I felt without the protective armor of constant productivity. How quickly the silence forced me to face parts of myself I've been too busy to acknowledge. Without the next show to prepare for, the next problem to solve, who was I really? We're not supposed to talk about these moments in our industry, about how many of us use the intensity of production life to outrun our own demons, to stay one step ahead of whatever pain or emptiness might be gaining on us. About how the adrenaline of show days becomes its own kind of addiction, making ordinary life feel flat and colorless by comparison. About how, for many of us, being needed, being the one who makes the impossible happen night after night, becomes so intertwined with our sense of self that without it, we hardly recognize the face in the mirror. But the dead air of 2020 didn't care about what we were supposed to talk about. It stripped away pretenses, leaving us alone with ourselves in ways that no one had prepared for. As days turned to weeks and months, I watched my colleagues pivot and struggle, found new ways to apply their skills in a virtual world. Others left the industry entirely, unable or unwilling to wait out the silence. For me, this dead air would become the unexpected opening to a different frequency, one I might have never have tuned into if the familiar broadcast had continued uninterrupted. Like all the most important signals, this one would come through clearest not in like all the most important signals, this one would come through clearest not in the noise, but in the spaces between. After those first disoriented weeks of silence, something unexpected happened. While many colleagues remained frozen in shock, waiting for the familiar world to return, I felt an old instinct awakening, the same one that had guided me as a child back in Romania, finding resourcefulness in scarcity, discovering possibility within rigid constraints. We've been planning this fundraising gala at the Governor Hotel in Portland, Oregon since May 2019. Nearly a year of meticulous preparation, venue walkthroughs, technical diagrams, timeline refinements, the countless invisible details that make this event appear effortless to the attendees. Every aspect had been accounted for, down to the precise position of speakers and the exact moment spotlights would illuminate the auctioneer. Then came March 11, 2020. I remember the weight in the pit of my stomach as I watched Oregon's governor announce on television that gatherings of 50 or more would be prohibited, effective immediately. The gala was scheduled for March 14, just 3 days away. 600 guests, months of planning, an organization financial lifeline, all suddenly impossible. The call from Lauren Dooley Clark at Ray's agent came within hours of the announcement. Her voice carried that particular tension I'd come to recognize in clients facing technical catastrophes. The controlled panic of someone whose plans were disintegrating, but who refused to accept defeat. "We can't just cancel," she said, dispensing with preliminaries. "This funding is too important for their programs. There has to be another way." In the silent beat that followed, I felt a strange clarity emerging. Yes, the conditions have changed, but this was at its core still the same challenge our industry always faced: how to create meaningful connections through carefully orchestrated technical elements. The tools would be different, but the objective remained the same. "We pivot to virtual," I heard myself saying. Not a watered down version of what we planned, but something designed specifically for this medium, something that could only exist this way. The next 74 hours unfolded in a blur of creation and problem solving, unlike anything I'd experienced in 15 years of production. Working alongside Todd and Brian at the AV department and auctioneer Jonna Wells, we reimagined what the gala would be when stripped of its physical trappings. The 3-hour program condensed to a dynamic 1-hour broadcast. The venue transformed from an elegant ballroom into a makeshift studio space. We were writing new rules in real time. How close could camera operators safely stand to on-screen talent? How would auction mechanics work without the energy of a room full of competing bidders? What technical redundancies were needed when everything depended on stable internet connections? Each question demanded immediate answers with no established protocols to guide us. The focus that emerges in crisis moments, when there's no time for second guessing, when every decision must be both immediate and correct. I've always found a strange comfort in this space where innovation becomes necessity rather than luxury. As we counted down to broadcast, I felt a familiar calm settling over. The same one that had carried me through countless show days emergencies over the years. The same one that had carried me through countless show day emergencies over the years. When the stream went live and donations began flowing in, not just maintaining but exceeding expectations despite the radically different format, I recognized a truth that would define the months ahead. This wasn't just about survival. This was about discovering new frequencies our industry would broadcast on, ones we might never have explored if not forced by circumstance. That first virtual gala broke the dam. Suddenly, our empty calendar filled with organizations seeking similar transformations. Multiple streams daily, each one refining our approach, each success building a foundation for the next innovation. We weren't just filling time or generating income. We were writing a new playbook. We were writing a new playbook in real time, creating methodology that would carry countless missions forward when their traditional fundraising avenues had disappeared. In those late nights, editing footage, troubleshooting connectivity issues, and rethinking every aspect of production for this new medium, I rediscovered parts of myself I'd almost forgotten. The resourceful girl who once figured out how to stretch meager rations to feed 10 siblings, the immigrant who reimagined her career when facing industry barriers, the technical director who thrived most when solving problems others deemed impossible. This pandemic pivot wasn't happening despite who I was. It was happening because of it. The signal I locked onto wasn't new at all, but rather the strongest, clearest broadcast of capabilities I have cultivated throughout my life. What surprised me most wasn't our professional adaptation, impressive as it was. It was how this period provided a strange shelter from the existential questions that had initially surfaced in the silence. With each successful virtual event, each grateful client, each mission sustained through our work, I could temporarily silence that uncomfortable inner inquiry about identity and purpose. I was still needed, still solving problems, still making the impossible happen. But life has a way of returning to questions, of stripping away distractions until we face what needs facing. And as spring turned to summer, as the initial adrenaline of crisis innovation settled into a routine, those deeper frequencies began breaking through again. Personal signals I couldn't ignore forever, no matter how busy I kept myself. The professional transformation was just the beginning. The real signal lock. As our newly developed virtual production system hit its stride, a different kind of disruption was forming on the horizon. Success had brought structure back to my days, the familiar freedom of pre-production meetings, technical run-throughs, and show calls, providing a comforting semblance of normalcy in an utterly abnormal time. But beneath this professional stability, something else was shifting. Summer in the event industry typically brings a natural lull, a natural break, a breathing space between the intense spring galas and the packed fall fundraising season. Under normal circumstances, there will be months for planning, maintenance, and the occasional outdoor festival. But 2020 had rewritten every rule. With virtual events becoming our new standard, the traditional seasonal patterns dissolved. Organizations that had initially postponed their spring events, hoping for a quick return to normalcy, now face the reality that waiting wasn't an option. Summer became unexpectedly busy as this delayed event moved forward in their virtual format. This constant production pace left little time for the deeper questions that had initially emerged in those quiet March days. I was functioning again, productive again, needed again. On the surface, I had successfully adapted, an industry professional who'd managed to thrive rather than merely survive in unexpected circumstances. Yet something in the system was beginning to overload. The isolation of pandemic life, the so many Zoom meetings, compounded the already solitary nature of our work. Days blurred together, each one focused on the technical demands of production without the energizing human element and connection that had always been my favorite aspect of live events. No crew lunches, no on-site collaboration with venue staff and the AV team, no post-event debriefs over dinners or drinks, just endless hours in front of our screens, managing digital connections while our physical world contracted to the dimensions of our home offices. Zeke's presence offered stability, but like so many couples suddenly confronted to share spaces 24/7, we were navigating new dynamics in our relationship. Both working from home, both processing the weight of global uncertainty in our own ways, kids at home. We moved through days in parallel rather than truly together, present physically but often distant emotionally as we each focus on keeping our professional worlds intact. The usual boundaries between work and personal life, never particularly solid in the event industries, dissolved completely. My home became my studio, my control room, my meeting space, every corner of my personal life now intertwined with production demands. That separation I'd always maintained, however, tenuously between who I was professionally and who I was personally blurred until I couldn't clearly distinguish between them. The technical term system override refers to that critical moment when input exceeds capacity, when too many signals flowing through too few channels create a breaking point. In computer systems, this leads to crashes, glitches, unexpected behaviors. In humans, well, it can manifest differently, but with equal inevitability. My system override didn't come a gradual erosion of the barriers and boundaries I built to compartmentalize different aspects of my life. The professional success and adaptation that kept me functioning also kept me from recognizing how fundamentally unbalanced everything had become. How the pandemic hadn't just changed how I worked, but was slowly altering who I was becoming. Those summer months of 2020 created a perfect storm of external isolation and internal vulnerability, a unique environment where new frequencies could break through, where signals I might otherwise have ignored became impossible to dismiss. In the spaces between virtual productions, in the quiet evening complete, in those solitary moments that had once been filled with travel and social connection, I found myself increasingly tuned to channels I never allowed myself to access before. I couldn't have known then that this system override, this breakdown of my carefully structured compartments, was setting the stage for something far more complex than professional adaptation. That as I engineered virtual solutions for clients, life was engineering a different kind of transformation for me. That the most significant frequency I would log on to that summer wouldn't be professional at all, but deeply, irrevocably personal. As our virtual production methodology solidified, summer arrived with an unexpected intensity. The traditional industry lull had evaporated like so many other normal patterns in 2020. Organizations that had postponed spring events now faced reality. Waiting wasn't an option, so missions needed funding, communities needed connection. The work continued relentlessly. Those early pandemic months held a strange kind of magic despite the challenges that came with this new territory. Former competitors became collaborators as we found ourselves united by a shared crisis. We're all in this together. It wasn't just a slogan yet. It was a lifeline we were all grabbing hold of. We share discoveries freely, each successful virtual event, a victory for the entire industry, proof that human connection could survive anything, even this. The technical challenges energized me. We had to distill hours of in-person content into tight, engaging broadcasts that could hold attention spans through screens. My podcast became a hub for sharing those innovations, what worked, what failed, how we were all adapting to this unprecedented moment. That's how I first connected with, we're going to call him Michael. He sent an email out of the blue, inviting me to see his broadcasting studio. His team has transformed their warehouse into a state-of-the-art facility, bringing in carefully distanced bands and DJs for weekly live streams. The production value was reportedly beyond anything others had achieved in those early pandemic days. When he invited me to tour the studio in May of 2020, the professional part of me saw it as another site visit, another chance to learn how someone else was solving the same problems we're all facing. I expected to see impressive equipment, innovative solutions, perhaps some approaches we could adapt for our own productions. What I didn't expect was what happened next. The journey back to myself began in a therapist's office with a tiny woman whose presence filled the room like a perfectly balanced sound. After cycling through counselors who couldn't tune into my frequency, Pamela Anderson, for real, her real name, her resonance was immediate and profound. She became my North Star when my internal compass had lost all sense of direction. By then, I was drowning in a darkness deeper than I'd ever known. The thoughts of ending it all circle like feedback in an infinite loop, held at bay only by the faces of my children, their innocence a lifeline I clung to when nothing else made sense. My husband could sense something was profoundly wrong, but in the busy mix of work, family, and music, he couldn't hear how far the levels had dropped, how close to zero I'd fallen. Pamela didn't just listen. She helped me rewire my whole system. Together, we traced every single part of trauma, from childhood wounds to the imagined love for Valentine, past neos, emotional static, all the way to my escape to America that had promised clean sound but brought its own kind of distortion. She became the engineer my marriage needed too, helping Zeke and me find harmony again when all we could hear was discord. Unlike the other therapists that I've seen who felt like they were reading from scripts about trauma, Pamela spoke to my heart with the kind of understanding that only comes from walking through your own shadows. She became more than just a therapist. She was the first person I could trust with the full weight of my story. With Pamela, I began the painstaking work of unpacking a lifetime of carried weight. Like a sound engineer finally tracing the source of persistent feedback, we followed every emotional signal back to its origin. From the little girl forced to shoulder adult responsibilities to the teenager turning romance novels into escape routes, to the young woman who crossed oceans to outrun her pain. Every story found its voice, every wound its witness. The body keeps the score, they say, and mine had been keeping a tally for decades. Each session with Pamela revealed another layer of stored trauma, another way my adult self was still responding to childhood programming. My need to control every variable in my life was rooted in those early years of navigating chaos. Her office became the first place I could truly fall apart without feeling the need to manage someone else's response to my breakdown. She saw me not as a collection of symptoms to be fixed, but as a whole person learning to integrate all her pieces. When I couldn't trust my own judgment, when every choice felt loaded with potential for disaster, she helped me find my internal compass again. Through our work together, my marriage began to heal too. Zeke and I found our way back to each other, not by erasing what had happened, but by building something stronger from the ruins. Pamela helped us understand that sometimes a relationship has to break open to grow deeper roots. The gym also emerged as an unexpected sanctuary. Under the weight of the barbell, I found a different kind of truth, one measured in plates and reps rather than emotional wreckage. Each lift became a form of meditation, each added pound a testament to my capacity for growth. The new tattoo I got during that time on my back, a phoenix rising, wasn't just ink. It's a permanent mark of this rebirth, this emergence from ashes I'd created myself. The physical transformation that followed began almost by accident. After a year of consistent training at the gym, using the weights as a way to process what therapy was uncovering, my body began to change. I was getting stronger, not just emotionally, but physically. At Whiting Gym, where I had been quietly rebuilding myself, rep by rep, one of the trainers noticed my process and she asked, "Have you ever considered competing in bodybuilding?" At almost 40, with 2 kids and a career in production, it had never crossed my mind. But something in the suggestion resonated. There was a goal that had nothing to do with the emotional wreckage I was still navigating, a way to measure progress in pounds and personal records rather than in degrees of healing. The bodybuilding journey became another form of therapy. While my heart was still learning to trust again, my body was showing me daily proof of my resilience. Discipline required for competition prep gave structure to days that might otherwise have been swallowed by an emotional undertow. Each rep became a rebellion against old patterns. Each added plate a declaration of new boundaries. The discipline of bodybuilding offered what my emotional life had been missing: clear metrics for progress, tangible proof of change, the simple truth that consistent effort creates undeniable results. In the gym, there was no room for self-deception. The weights don't lie. They don't caution. They don't make allowances for your story. This raw honesty began bleeding into other areas of my life. I started seeing how my lack of boundaries had shaped not just my personal relationship, but my professional ones too. The same drive that had me taking on impossible show demands was the same force that had left me vulnerable to emotional chaos. As my physical strength grew, something else emerged too. A deeper understanding that transformation isn't just about surviving the fire, but about choosing what to forge from the flames. This journey from brokenness to strength began reshaping my professional mission too. What started as a personal survival became the foundation of the Fit for Events framework, a holistic approach to resilience in our industry. The podcast became a platform for discussing not just technical excellence, but the vital importance of mental, emotional, and physical fitness in events, event production, and technology. I began advocating for a new kind of strength in our field, one that acknowledges we're human beings behind the gear, not just technical operators. Looking back at 2020, I see now how every piece fits together in ways I couldn't have understood then. The pandemic wasn't just a crisis, it was an invitation to deeper change. Michael wasn't just an unnecessary heartbreak. He was a catalyst that forced me to face every unhealed part of myself. The loss cracked me open, yes, but through those breaks, new light found its ways in. What emerged from this forge of 2020 wasn't just survival, it was a complete reconstruction of self. The woman who walks into venues now carries not just technical expertise, but hard-won wisdom about the importance of boundaries, the strength in vulnerability, the power of integrating all parts of ourselves, even the broken ones. The industry crisis that brought us together in unprecedented ways showed us what's possible when we drop our usual defenses. Though we might never again have that same catalyst for connection, the lesson remains. Our greatest strength lies not in individual excellence, but in our courage to be fully human together. The old oak tree from my childhood taught me about finding my way home. These years taught me that sometimes home isn't a place at all. It's the strength you build within yourself, the wisdom you earn through fire, the peace that comes from finally understanding that every broken piece and every triumph is part of our becoming. Only now, years later, with the benefit of distance and healing, can I look at this story objectively, like reviewing a show recording long after the heat of live production has cooled. The clarity that comes with time allows me to see not just the pain, but the purpose, not just the loss, but the lessons. This is no longer a story of destruction, but one of transformation, told not from the eye of the storm, but from the steady ground of understanding on the other side. That was part of the When the Feed Goes Dark. It's not the entire reading of that chapter. It's just snippets from the chapter. The chapter would have been too long to go into all the details. So obviously I have skipped parts, and you're going to have to wait for the book to come out to figure out what those parts were. If chapter 1 was about strength and California Dreams was about ambition, well, this chapter is all about surrender. The kind that doesn't feel noble, the kind that brings you to your knees, the kind that you never see coming. And for a long time, I thought the pain was the story, but it wasn't. The story was what came after the pain. The sitting in silence, the writing, the looking inward instead of outward for someone to rescue me from myself. I wrote Bridges and Pieces as a sequel to this chapter, not just for closure, but for integration. I can't wait for you to read that as well. Because you can build a bridge with pieces you refuse to look at. And you can become whole if you're still mourning the version of yourself who needed someone else to complete her. If you've ever loved someone who cracked you wide open, if you've ever had to walk away from a feeling that felt like fire but left only smoke, these chapters weren't just mine. Maybe they were also yours. In my next week's episode, the final one in this anniversary mini-series, we enter the fire fully, because from those ashes came iron. While I barely touch on that process, Iron and Ashes is a story of rebirth through bodybuilding, not just as a sport, but as a discipline, as devotion, as a path back to a self I could finally live in without shame. Until then, well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for witnessing and for walking with me through the dark towards whatever light we can still claim. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with other professionals like yourself. If you're interested in learning more about TreeFan events, including our future AI education talks and workshops, or to see how we can support your next event, book a free 20-minute consultation through the link in the episode notes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and social media for updates on future episodes, industry insights, AI news and tips, and more. And if you have any topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out.